Welcome to The Favorites, the podcast presented by Bet365. We are part of the Volume Podcast Network. I am Chad Millman of the Action Network. I am live from my Tommy John home studio, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my companion, my compadre, my BFF professional bettor, Simon Hunter. Hello, Simon.
Chad, how we doing, brother?
Dude, I'm so psyched for today's show. We're going hardcore football, hardcore free agency, hardcore draft. We are joined by one of ESPN's top talent and NFL draft and fantasy analysts, one of the swellest people in all of sports media, the pride of the Wesleyan University Cardinals, my neighbor here in West Hartford, Connecticut. Welcome back to the show, Field Yates.
It's good to be on. It's kind of like an annual tradition now. I guess after you do it twice, it becomes an annual tradition. Because if memory serves, the last appearance was around this time of the year last year. And since then,
we had you on. Didn't we have you on in August?
Man, everything is a blur.
Maybe you had just injured your shoulder.
Oh, okay.
know?
You know what? I got to be honest with you. That shoulder, they say that the biggest issue is the actual, the capacity to come back to 100% with your shoulder. I just think it's clouded my memory. Everything is a blur over the last 6 or 7 months since suffering what is considered by many the single dumbest injury in the history of sports media, just in sports in general.
Well, listen, I'll tell you a story from last night.
Okay.
that'll make you feel so much better.
I
So
need
I'm
it.
talking to my son, my 18-year-old son. We're talking about the Bears. Of course, during the day, as he's supposed to be in school, he's a second semester senior, so
Mhm.
he's not paying too much attention right now. He's just texting me about the Bears trade for Joe Thuney, which we are gonna dig into. And I
Yeah.
mentioned to him while I'm making dinner and he's hanging out with me that we're having you on the show today. And my kid says, "Oh, I think he's friends with our neighbors. Like I saw them once and we were talking about sports and they mentioned him." And I said, "Yeah, he is. I've seen Field at their house and he lives in town." And he said to me, "You don't have a lot of friends. You should just hang out with Field." And I said, I said, "No. He's younger.
No.
He's better looking,
Oh,
more
stop.
famous. It's just going to make me feel bad about myself." And then I did tell him that we saw you and your beautiful family at dinner one night, and you had your young kids at the dinner table. This was about a month ago. You
Yeah.
had, you had one kid in your lap, one kid was running around the table. My wife and I actually said out loud, we kind of felt bad about it. "That looks miserable. We would not trade places with you, no matter how much you have going for you."
I can remember that instance very well. And what I will say is that as it turns out, I'm once again by myself right now with my kids. My wife doesn't travel often, but when she does, it seems to be aligned with when you and I are either talking or hanging out in the same place.
Yeah.
I learned my lesson that time. I thought, hey, you know what? I've got both kids to myself. I am this well-established girl dad that can handle anything that comes my way. Why don't I take them out to dinner? That was a poor decision. So
Yeah.
the itinerary for the next 3 nights, because this is now one night into a 4 night departure for my wife, is to maybe, if we're feeling very adventurous, get in the car and drive through somewhere. That's as far as we will go. There will no be going inside of establishments this weekend, other than gymnastics class and a couple of other things that we are required to attend as we are every single weekend.
I'm going to stay so far away from your side of town.
Smart.
As a reminder, the Favorites podcast is presented by Bet365. And now, new Bet365 customers get $150 in bonus bets when you bet $5. Sign up using promo code Favorites, deposit $10, place a bet for $5, get $150 in bonus bets. Those bonus bets can be used on spreads, totals, player props, futures, and more, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. All right, before we get Field and all the burning questions from the NFL, very quickly, reminder, officially RSVP for our free Favorites Live Show event in Chicago. This will be for the Elite Eight March Madness games on Saturday, March 29th. Joe's Bar on Weed Street, less formally known as Joe's on Weed, near Lincoln Park in Chicago. Free event, free drinks, free live show. I'll be there. Simon will be there. Stucky will be there. Jim Root from Three Man Weave and the Big Bets on Campus podcast will be there. RSVP to reserve your spot by clicking in the link in the episode's description or Google Favorites Live Event Chicago. All right, let's kick it off, Field. Number one, yesterday was a huge day of news in the NFL. DK Metcalf wants a trade. The Bears trade for Joe Thuney. But the biggest news to me, Max Crosby signed a 3-year, $105 million contract, $90 million guaranteed. That feels like folly to me. Your take?
Okay, so here's what I would say. There's been a lot of turnover in Las Vegas. So they haven't even been the Las Vegas Raiders for that long, and they've had a lot of coaching and general manager changes in that time. Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler were replaced eventually by Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco, and then they decided to make the shift one more time. Now it's John Spytek as their GM with Pete Carroll as their head coach. Bad, probably for vibes to be making that many changes, and not ideal for young quarterbacks to constantly be shifting systems. Probably pretty good for star players. One of the messages that we heard yesterday from John Spytek and Pete Carroll was, because there was a press conference that was associated with this landmark deal, was, hey, we're just getting started here. And what better way to get started than to affirm to the entire locker room that it's not just that Max is our most talented player, it's that Max carries himself and puts in the work required to be great, that if every player followed his lead, we'd be a whole lot better. So I'm not saying that the Raiders, if they had kept their prior administration, would not have touched Max Crosby's contract. Last year, they did the old borrow from a future year, accelerate it onto the present year, which basically forces their hand back to the table the year later. But yeah, the Raiders are trying to make a statement here. And one thing I will say about Las Vegas, and I think that I probably align closer to you with this, is like if I were the Raiders, would be thinking long and hard about what is my legitimate path towards the playoffs in this division. The Chiefs, despite the humble pie served in the Super Bowl, are still the Chiefs. The Broncos and the Chargers are two teams that both made the playoffs and are on the rise. Each of those three teams has both a young quarterback and a very accomplished, and I think we all believe still has some good coaching left in him, head coach. If you're the Raiders, would you rather play a bit more of the long game or try to find your way to sneak in to the playoffs sooner than later? Sounds like when you hire a 73-year-old head coach in Pete Carroll, who the second he steps on the sideline this fall will be the oldest coach in league history, and you have Tom Brady as one of your principal voices, your mindset is we want to win sooner rather than later. And so the Max Crosby extension is an affirmation that we're going to continue to build around Max and a few other players, and we expect to win, maybe not win big this year, but win sooner rather than later. I would have been more inclined to soft reset and try to build this thing organically. But that's easy for me to say when I'm not in the weeds every single day competing with that locker room and the one who is not judged based off of the wins and losses of the franchise like Pete Carroll and John Spytek will be going forward.
Simon, this feels like a tragically terrible move for a franchise that cannot get it right.
Yeah.
For a player who last year, this feels to me like the owner is constantly trying to placate and be friends with the star player. Because last year, when Antonio Pierce went from interim coach to head coach, it was because Max Crosby said he didn't want to play with the Raiders if Antonio Pierce wasn't going to be the head coach.
Okay.
So we talked about the Raiders in the mailbag. Like, this is creeping up as one of the teams consistently. I feel like as a fan, I'd never want to root for.
Yeah, and it's tough if you're a Raiders fan because you're not one or two pieces away, right? You are multiple years away. And it's interesting, that division, 4 of the 5 oldest head coaches in that division. Like, people don't realize that's an old school type of division now when you really think about it, where a lot of these guys have been around forever and they're winners. They're proven winners. And they're in a weird spot now where, the other 3 teams seem like they found their quarterback, and this team here, like, I'd love to get Fields' view on it. Are they really going for Geno Smith? Are they really in the Sam Darnold business? There's so many rumors, and it's nonstop too, where I told Chad last week, I almost got caught. I almost bet on them because I thought it was a sure thing that Stafford was going there, that the ink was drying, that was a real deal move. It wasn't. That was all just him leveraging his position with the Rams. So is it true, Fields? Are they going after one of these quarterbacks? Or are they just, going to release Minshew here and then just roll with whatever they can find in the draft this upcoming season?
I would imagine that the most likely thing that happens to Geno Smith this offseason is an extension with Seattle as opposed to being on the move. I don't know the exact number there, but Geno is going into the final year of a 3-year, $100 million deal. There was some upside on top of that through incentives, some of which Geno has already hit. I think you're more likely to see Geno do a remix of that deal. Maybe it's more because the quarterback market has exploded and he is playing good football. And we don't talk about tread on the tires for quarterbacks that often, but he's one of the least, experience isn't the right word, but the least utilized players at that position for his age, right? Because he had like basically that, 7-8 year period where he just watched most games from the sideline. So Geno, I think, is probably going to stick in Seattle going forward. I think the Raiders are going to be in the mix on some of these quarterbacks. And really, there's only one that moves the needle. That would be Sam Darnold. And I'd say this is it's possible the Raiders could get Shedeur Sanders 6th overall in the draft. It's also possible the Raiders could be motivated to try to move up in the draft because the thing about April 24th through 26th in Green Bay, Wisconsin this year is, yeah, it's possible he falls to you, but he also might not. And if you don't get your quarterback in the draft, you did nothing in free agency. You're basically punting on the season. No team can win with the level of quarterback play that they had last year. The roster is simply not nearly good enough to compete. So I think there's a chance they get in the Sam Darnold mix. And then I think if they don't, it tells us they're feeling pretty good about how they can plot their path in the draft. You just can't afford to wait. The Giants, the Browns, the Titans, I reversed the order there, but I would say that those three teams in that order are most desperate for a quarterback. When you've got three that pick 1, 2, 3, and you're at 6, like you just can't settle for the possibility of maybe a quarterback getting there. So the Raiders are going to be aggressive. This would not be the offseason that I would be shopping for a quarterback in an aggressive way, but they are looking at it like we don't have that many strikes in our count, and we're not going to just take one before the games have actually begun.
So the other team that made moves yesterday, the Chiefs got rid of Joe Thuney, and they lopped off 16 million from the cap, which they needed to do.
Yep.
Thuney was sort of the star of that offensive line this year, not just for the way he was playing at guard, but for the way he shifted out to left tackle and was serviceable when that was clearly the biggest Achilles heel for the Chiefs. And even if it wasn't a great Super Bowl performance, this is a guy who accrued so much respect in the locker room and then throughout the league. But they had to get rid of him because they needed to save the money. If you're the Bears and you've got Josiah Jackson now from the Rams and Joe Thuney from the Chiefs, do you think you have solidified your interior line? Or have you just taken guys who are maybe one who underperformed because of injury and then something quirky that happened in LA with Jackson, or a guy who's old and might have had his last best spot and was just really expensive? Like, how am I supposed to feel about this as a Bears fan?
Really good is what I would say. So let's talk about this. Let's break it down in a couple of different ways. You have this head coach and Ben Johnson, who, of course, chose Chicago over pretty much any job he wanted, right? That was substantial. It was a big move for this franchise. And it spoke to, I think, the way that Ben views the roster already, and also how I think he views the front office and the vision and the cohesion he felt during that interview process with Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren, the GM and the president of the Bears, amongst others who were also in that mix. That being said, it's still important once you land the coach that you make him happy beyond that, right? Like, you want to woo him during the interview process to incentivize him to take this job. And then you want to show him just how much on the same page you two are. And, Jonah Jackson is familiar to Ben Johnson, 4-year starter for Ben Johnson in Detroit, right? I mean, the guy played left guard for the first 4 years of his rookie contract, I guess the entirety of his rookie contract with the Lions. I'm sure that Ben had a prominent voice in this process to acquire Jonah. It wasn't as if, the Bears went to him and said, we're thinking about acquiring Jonah. He said, I think I'm good on that guy. We'll maybe go a different direction. They said, no, we're acquiring him. Like, that does not get done if Ben Johnson was not confident in the player that he still is. Joe Thuney, this is a good reminder that circumstances are different for every single team. The Chiefs could not go 5 minutes this past year without discussing just how respected Joe Thuney is. He was in a locker room that is full of future Hall of Fame players. Certainly Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Chris Jones has that trajectory, and maybe a couple of others get there by the time it's all said and done. Joe Thuney was frequently referred to as amongst the most, if not the most respected, dependable players on the entire roster. The Chiefs' season was not falling apart. They lost one game during the regular season until Week 18 when the backups played against the Broncos. That being said, it was clear their ceiling was not at the same level as it had been in prior years in which they made deep playoff runs because the offensive line was a disaster. They took some swings. They have drafted in the third and second round Wanye Morris and Kingsley Suamataia, respectively, and those guys just weren't ready for prime time. So they said, let's take our best offensive lineman, Joe Thuney, and make him a left tackle, which he was, by the way, first-team All-American at North Carolina State way back when he came out. But Joe Thuney has the strongest stamp of approval from Bill Belichick and Andy Reid. I would say that's a pretty good starting point. Does he have 5 years left in him? Probably not. But does he have 2 years left in him? I sure think so. And I think, I don't know this for a fact. I haven't seen it reported anywhere. I'm just using my common sense here. Wouldn't stun me if the Bears and Joe Thuney find a way to do some sort of short-term pact that maybe guarantees Joe all of this season, which he's going to make that money from the Bears no matter what. You don't trade for a guy and then cut him, but guarantees him this year, maybe some of next year as well. Maybe they say, hey, we'll do a 3-year deal that reduces your cap hit a little bit this year. Maybe your average annual value drops down by a little bit. So maybe a 1-year, $16 million deal turns into a 3-year, $42 million deal, where the third and final year is non-guaranteed. So if Joe's no longer giving it, he doesn't no longer has that elite upside in him at age 34 or 35, which you don't see many of those in the NFL, we'll move on. But in the short term, the Bears have completely reconstructed not just the talent of their offensive line room, but I really think the I would say the leadership, the maturity, the intangibles to that offensive line room, which when you've got a young quarterback with so many gifts, but had so many things last year that just did not work out in his favor, you got to find ways to pour every resource into him. And with Ben Johnson and these two offensive linemen, it's a darn good start for them. Really good.
I may or may not, yesterday after the Bears traded for Joe Thuney, have decided that the interior offensive line, which to me might be the most important point of sort of strategy and competence that you need to run an offense with a guy like Caleb Williams, who got sacked so much last year. I might have felt overconfident. I may or may not have bet on the Bears to win the Super Bowl. I'm just saying, Simon.
I think you're required to do so every year, right? Isn't that just like in the Millman blood?
I am required to do it, but I might have done it yesterday with more enthusiasm than I have in years past. Since Justin Fields prior to this past year. So it's been 2 years since I felt this confident, which is a run.
Yeah, that is.
And they might not be done yet, Joe. I've heard the rumors they might go after the center from Atlanta.
Yes, Drew Dahlman.
I have him rated as the fourth best center in football, so that would just be huge to keep adding to that interior.
And that's also
think about how many times we've talked about the Falcons running game and the most important part of their running game being their center and their right guard.
Yeah.
And so again,
same system.
Same system.
Zone scheme. Yep.
Yes, exactly. So of course, because my kid isn't paying attention in his AP psychology class, yesterday we were texting about the Bears getting Drew Dahlman and how important he has been to the Atlanta Falcons run game. That's when I pulled the trigger, by the way, on the Super Bowl bet. Was after I decided they were getting Drew Dahlman.
Last thing I'll say here on the Bears, I'm sure we want to get to other topics as well. You can say whatever you want about Ryan Poles, who I happen to believe has done a pretty good job in terms of in a few ways. First of all, they made a masterstroke trade to land Caleb Williams. He's going to be a good player. I still believe that was an excellent deal. On top of that, the books are clean here in Chicago for the most part. Like they've made 2 trades for guys and Jonah and Joe, who are accounting for like $30+ million in 2025 as the contracts are currently written. They still have like $50 million to spend, right? And there are some in-house free agents that we'll see on, right? Like Keenan Allen probably seems like he's not likely to return, but we shall see, right? Like the books have largely been kept clean, and Chicago is not one of those teams, and this is not a negative, but they don't push all their money into the future, a la Philly, Cleveland, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, etc. Like they kind of keep structure flat. So there actually is some good wiggle room here for this team to, despite the fact that they've already made 2 notable trades, go big game hunting. Maybe a Drew Dahlman, maybe some other pieces as well.
And I know Chad wants to go to the draft. Before we get there, Chad, I need to know more about DK because to me, it's a big deal where this might structure a whole division. That division is the AFC East. Everyone I'm hearing from is Bills, Patriots. That they're going to be the 2 teams fighting for DK. Field here is locked in with the Patriots. Is that true? Is that really the guy the Patriots are going after? Or is that a smokescreen by them to drive up the price to the Bills to try to get DK? Because it's a last year, right, of DK's deal. So if he gets traded here, he's going to get paid a big amount of money.
Yep. 2 factors to note here, and you're right on the contract, is I think if the Seahawks get this done, they're going to work very hard to make sure it's an AFC team. It's not that you can't trade a player from the NFC to another team in the NFC, but there's something a little bit different about this high-profile trades where, if DK gets traded to the Patriots, the Seahawks play them once every 4 years. They play them in Seattle once every 8 years. Like I haven't done the math or checked when New England last played or Buffalo last played in Seattle, but I mean, it's possible that DK could be on he could be retired by the time they next play in Buffalo if it was this past year, right? Like that is possible, and it's a factor that I think teams are somewhat mindful of. So let's start there. I think AFC would be the preference, all things being equal. On top of that, you're right. He's going to need a new deal as well. He's scheduled to make $18 million this year. He signed a 3-year, $72 million extension a few off seasons ago. That no longer is commensurate with the market. It just isn't. Jamar Chase probably explode the wide receiver market, but it's already boomed a lot since DK did his deal. So if you're a team that's acquiring DK Metcalf, you have to account for not just the draft capital that Seattle wants, but also the fact you're going to have to pay DK Metcalf, which kind of deflates the draft capital value a little bit. You're paying double freight in this case. DK is an interesting one, right? So such a talented player, explosive. He's one of the best deep threat receivers in the entire NFL. He also is a player that has run hot and cold, right? I mean, this is a guy who at times we've been talking about him and need to control his emotions more. So I think he needs to go somewhere where he feels as though he's got a chance to win, right? And so I think New England, do they need him desperately? Yeah, they do. And do I think that the Patriots have some things going for them? Drake May certainly looks like he's a really promising player, and Mike Vrabel is a stud head coach. But I think they're more than DK Metcalf away from getting anywhere close to competing in that division. So I think I might be looking more towards teams actually like the Chargers, who have been reported as a DK Metcalf suitor. I think the Texans have been mentioned. I think the Bills have been mentioned. Teams like that if you're DK or if you're those teams, you're saying to yourself, hey, we get this guy, we might be the team to beat in the AFC. This is unfair to the Chiefs, in my opinion. But right now, I'm just telling you, talking to people around the NFL, this is, and not every person, right? I haven't canvassed every single person who has an opinion, but I've talked to enough people that feel like there's some sharks in the water right now, right? Like they feel as though Kansas City is going to be excellent next year, but that the Super Bowl reminded them that you can still make the playoffs and do some damage if you're not the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think people feel as though, well, KC deserves to be the favorites, and I'm sure they will be, at least in the AFC West. You might be able to get them in a one-game scenario as well and breathe some life into your franchise.
So you were at the combine where I'm sure you were having a lot of these conversations.
Yep.
Give me your most impressive prospect from the combine.
So I did not spend a lot of time at the podiums where the players were speaking to the media. So I'll give my evaluation just from the perspective of what he did on the field.
Yep.
And it's polarizing. It is. It's probably Shamar Stewart or Matthew Golden from two separate Texas schools, Texas A&M for Shamar Stewart and Matthew Golden at Texas. And I'll lean towards Golden for this reason: is I prefer when the combine looks like the tape and the tape looks like the combine, as opposed to the combine not perfectly aligning with the tape. So Shamar Stewart, I've used this phrase 50 times, might as well make it 51 times, is the most fascinating prospect in the draft. He's 6'5". He dropped from 280 pounds to 264 pounds from the Senior Bowl to the combine, which is like a month apart. So he may have been like in combine training mode, but still at 264 pounds, he ran a 4.60 40. He had one of the best vertical jumps of any defensive player at like 40 or 41 inches. His broad jump was 11 feet. The guy, if you saw him, is one of the most impressive looking humans that you will see. He had 4.5 sacks in his career, though. 4.5, 1.5 in each of his 3 seasons at A&M. So you're going to pay the guy to be a pass rusher, and he had just 1.5 sacks each of his 3 college seasons. He's a really, really talented player and a really solid kid, too. This is not a kid who just didn't produce because he wasn't engaged. It was just couldn't quite finish the job on these sacks. I think he's going to end up going as high as like pick 7, 8, 10. I have him a little bit lower in the rankings because I'm just a bit more risk averse. That would be a big bet on a guy who had such a modest college career. Matthew Golden from Texas at 191 pounds ran a 4.29 40. And this kid can scoot. He had a really good season. He had just 1 year at Texas. He was previously at Houston, but he had a great finish to the year. In 2 of the final 4 games Texas played, he had 149 or more receiving yards. I wish he had gotten to 150 because 149 just sounds a little bit awkward. That being said, you guys get the point. He was big when it mattered most for Texas, and he can fly. Like, that is clear on tape. He was the second fastest player in Indianapolis behind only Max Hairston, a guy who I've loved throughout the process from Kentucky at 4.28. That being said, Golden, a guy who who grew on me throughout the year because his play improved throughout the year, should be viewed, at least in my estimation, as a first-round lock.
Don't we have enough evidence at this point of guys who are physical freaks and didn't perform in college not being the best reaches for the NFL draft?
Yeah. Yes. That being said, there are like things that are tantalizing in life that we consistently go back to all the time, right? It's just hard not to, or do you prefer fashion over function when it comes to your car, or, things like that, right? Or like, people will sacrifice warmth or comfort with their clothing to look a little bit cooler, it's like, it's just hard not to. So, I think probably the truth is that Shamar Stewart, he's going to be one of those guys that a GM either gets the feather in the cap or perhaps the walking papers from a few years from now, right? You either sit there and you look like a genius because you were audacious enough to take a kid whose skills were so enticing, or hey, the guy ends up in 3 years with just 4.5 sacks at the NFL level, and that's just not good enough from a first-round pick who was paid to rush the passer.
It's like that James Harris quote, Chad. I'm not a model. That's why I wasn't invited to the combine. I'm a football player. And that's the issue, right? There's a couple of guys, they look the part. Are they a football player? So, I mean, off that topic, I've heard Quentin Ewers, the guy who hurt his draft prospect at the combine. Are there anyone that jumps out to you that really hurt their draft stock from the combine? Because we know that, guys are sitting out the combine nowadays because of this exact fear of hurting their own draft stock.
Yeah, I'll give you a few guys that performed or didn't perform in the way in which I think it could have helped them or hurt them, or helped them by doing the opposite here. I love Tyler Booker. He's a really good player from Alabama. I think he still goes in the first round, but he ended up doing all the testing after measuring at like 6'5", 325 pounds. He's a big human. He's a Connecticut kid, by the way, as well. I think he's New Haven. But this guy is hard to miss. And he had a great college career at Alabama. I mean, you hear, they love him. Nick Saban, who will be on the broadcast, I'm sure will have glowing things to say about Booker. Athletic testing, though, just wasn't great. And there are teams that are just a little bit scared on guards who aren't that explosive. He ran a 5.3 940. Doesn't matter how fast you are as a guard. No, but, it also suggests that your foot quickness is not in line with where some of these defensive tackles are. I still think he goes in the first round, but I moved him down from like maybe a guy that could go as high as like 13, 14 to maybe a guy that ends up going like 20, 21. His teammate, Jalen Milroe, I think actually would have benefited from doing some stuff at the combine. The throwing is always going to be a hot topic, but don't you guys think, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, so if you disagree vehemently, let me know, but if Jalen Milroe had gone to the combine and run a 4.3 540, I think it would have helped him a lot, because it would have been a reminder to people that for the deficiency he does have right now as a pocket and rhythm passer, he's one of the most explosive players in the NFL in the draft. He just is. Like, if I'm taking Jalen Milroe, and I haven't finished, I'm working on my top 100 right now. It's not finished. It won't be for some time. There's a lot of work to be done there. But like, you could tell me Jalen deserves to be 40th. You could also say he might be closer to 75th. He's such a tantalizing guy. I think if he had run, it really would have helped remind us of why he is so intriguing. And, just generally speaking, like, running backs and wide receivers that don't run great are going to come out of the combine, feel a little bit different. Caleb Johnson from Iowa is a really great player who's just like a perfect fit for a zone scheme. He just wants to put one foot in the ground and he's got great vision, just hit the hole and go. Run a 4.57, not a great number for him. So running backs and wide receivers that miss that speed mark are always going to be impacted in a negative way, unfortunately. You just don't see many 4.5 or slower wide receivers going round one. If you're closer to 4.6 than 4.5, it might mean that Caleb Johnson goes 60th as opposed to, I thought, maybe 35th at one point during the process.
I feel like everybody would be better off. Maybe you disagree with this.
Okay.
Everyone would be better off if nobody worked out at the combine and you just used film that you had from the players on the field. And what you did at the combine, you did your interviews, You got to meet with the players one-on-one. You got to
Hmm.
know them personally. You got to get a sense of who they are. You got to see how they perform in front of the media. I think the combine creates such recency bias that it
Hmm.
screws up the metrics and the measurements and the feelings for all the people who have been doing the work all season long and changes the calculus on this stuff. I think it's a terrible way to try to manage the draft because you go into it thinking, oh my God, I just saw a superhero. Jalen Milroe, judge him on what you saw. We've got
Yeah.
so much film on Jalen Milroe. If you need the combine and Jalen Milroe to run a 4.35 40 to decide, oh my God, we have to get this guy. And then you get him into camp and realize, wait a second, he's not an accurate passer. He's just a really dynamic athlete. Shame on you, not you, Field, but on the scouts.
So I'll take it one step further. We're in the same vicinity here, but a little bit different. I've wondered why we don't have the draft 5 days after the national championship game, right? And you think, I wonder if like, and I hope this does not come across as piling on because I was incredibly optimistic, like in a detrimental manner on Anthony Richardson for fantasy football purposes last year. Does that guy go fourth overall if the combine is, excuse me, if the draft is done on January 20th as opposed to April 20th? You have 3 months to think and overthink stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, okay, yeah, I mean, it is impressive that some of these guys, Shamar Stewart, Anthony Richardson, can run as fast as they can at that size. But if every coach and GM says the starting point of the evaluation is the tape, maybe it'll be different. And yeah, is it a shorter window to evaluate? I mean, yes, for the first time, but it won't be for every year after that, right? It just means that your scouts start up on the 2026 draft on January 30th of 2025 as opposed to April 30th of 2025. So, it is an interesting debate, and I do wonder about how the combine will look in future years because of the number of players that are opting out. And I mean opting out of the testing, of course, because they all still showed up. But last year, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. showed up, did interviews, measured, I think just left. Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors didn't even take measurements, and those guys had two of the greatest rookie seasons we've ever seen. So it's sort of like if those guys are going to be completely unbothered by their participation or lack thereof at the combine, what is the point of it? It's a fascinating debate. I like the combine still because of the intel gathering, and I do enjoy seeing some of these kids who are more like day three players who can reaffirm or boost their stock. That being said, it's a very different event when you're sitting there and each position group that comes by, you're like, okay, so my top wide receiver, no sign of him. Top quarterbacks, no sign of them. It just hits a little bit differently. There's no two ways around it.
Yeah,
Look,
when I
it's
talk to coaches, Chad, the combine, honestly, it's mental warfare. It's not really about on the field. It's about making these kids uncomfortable, asking them crazy questions, honestly talking shit to them. Like a lot of these drills you see on TV, sometimes they're at 10 o'clock at night. Like it's just messing with these kids' heads. And it always cracks me up, but it's the great part of that movie Draft Day. Did they go to the kid's birthday party? Like that's what this 3 months is about. All the stupid shit we don't even think about. It's them trying to figure out who this person is as a man, how are they mentally, and what will they be coming out of it. So I'm with you, Chad. I get like the combine can be a little bit much at times, but overall, I love the idea of it. Of they're just trying to poke and prong these guys and really figure stuff out, what kind of man they are, because it is so mental. And a guy we heard a ton about, Chad, that might have not done the best at the combine is Sanders, right? I mean, this is a quarterback position. He's polarizing a lot of front offices. What's your view on that, Fields? Like, what are you hearing about him right now? Where I'm of the mindset of teams that love him are going to absolutely talk shit about him and bash him to the media right now because that is the game of the draft, right? They're going to say they don't like the way he spoke, that he's arrogant, that he's too cocky. They probably love that behind closed doors. They're just like thinking,
Of course.
I don't be trading up to number one or number two to get this kid. So what are you hearing about him right now?
Yeah, I take a lot of that stuff with a grain of salt what's reported, and I'm not talking about the people. I'm just talking about like the people that are reporting. I'm just saying like the content, because of what you're describing, Simon, is that like there might be some motivation, right? There might be motivation to get this guy to fall, like because it's a completely unpredictable event, and you're at the mercy of others if you want to shift your draft order, right? If you want to go from 6 to 4 and you're the Raiders, you got to convince the Patriots to do a trade. You can't just say, hey, we'll flip flop, right? So I have not had a conversation with somebody who has spent time with Shador and explicitly has said to me something that has negatively impacted my evaluation of him. I like Shador as a player. I'm not as bullish on either of the quarterbacks at the top as I was the first 3 last year, which I think is in line with where most people wind up. And that has nothing to do with them as humans. It's just from a football talent evaluation standpoint. So Cam Ward, my top 32 will drop tomorrow on ESPN, sometime soon. If not tomorrow, it's very soon. And Cam Ward is, I'm sorry, I should know this better, 6 or 7, and Shador is 17th. So, and last year, I mean, those guys at the top, from the day the draft order was set, I said, let's just move on to pick 4, because in some order, it's going to be Caleb, Jaden, Drake. You decide which order it actually is. More of the question was, would it be Jaden or Drake at pick number 2? So anyways, I think those guys both go. I think Cam Ward's going first overall. I just think that's where we've landed. I don't know to who, but it's to somebody. And the Titans have found themselves in a pretty good position, actually. Because I do believe, and again, there's no such thing as a unanimous sentiment in the NFL, but I spoke to significantly more people that if they had the option to choose between Cam Ward or Shador Sanders, would prefer Ward to Sanders while still liking Sanders. It's not like, hey, I like Cam and Shador does nothing for me. It's just, if you're giving me the option, one or the other, it's a binary decision here. I'm taking Cam Ward. And I also think that because teams with their quarterback preferences, in some cases, it is like you like one guy and you don't like the other. It's like house hunting, right? You might see 2 houses for homes for similar value. You really like one, but the other lacks 3 features that you really feel are musts, and you're not going to have any interest in it. So I think the Titans, whether they want to take Cam Ward or whether they find a team that prefers Cam Ward enough that they would move ahead of Cleveland, who of course has number 2, they can get a pretty decent trade package here. But it wouldn't surprise me if the first 3 picks in the draft are 2 quarterbacks and then one of Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, which means despite the Patriots winning in week 18 and pushing them down to 1 to 4, they may well end up with one of, to me, the 2 best players in the draft. I still view Travis Hunter first and then Abdul Carter second as the 2 best players in this class.
I'm glad we're talking about the combine because it's the perfect transition to our friends at Tommy John. Simon, even for elite prospects, the NFL draft can be a nerve-wracking experience. Think about it. After years of hard work, preparation, and physical sacrifice, you endure the invasive poking and prodding of the combine process. And then one day in April, you get all dressed up, surrounded by loved ones and hangers-on, and you anxiously wait for the phone to ring and your life to change. And if front offices don't like what they see, if they sense you lack the proper confidence, that agonizing wait can turn into public humiliation. Simon Hunter and Field Yates, I can tell by the looks on your faces, you're thinking what I'm thinking. It's the same situation with our underpants.
Yeah.
We work hard. We make sacrifices. We endure the pokes and prods of a demanding lifestyle. But even when we're all dressed up, surrounded by our own loved ones and hangers-on, if we lack the elite downstairs preparation and undercarriage confidence of flexible, breathable, top-quality underwear, we too run the risk of lowered expectations of public humiliation. Luckily, our beloved sponsor, Tommy John, can end your agonizing wait every day. They make the metaphorical call, offering you the assurance of best-in-class underwear and casual essentials. With Tommy John, you effortlessly stride across the stage of life, greeting the commissioner of comfort with the confident handshake of a man whose downstairs affairs are in order. Simon, why will you be wearing more Tommy John in 2025?
Because comfort is king.
Right now, you can shop TommyJohn.com/favorites and get 25% off your first order. That's right. Top 5 value at 3rd round prices. Save 25% at TommyJohn.com/favorites. That's TommyJohn.com/favorites. Matt Mitchell had a good time with that one. He did.
Well done by Matt.
Field, I want to switch quickly to fantasy for a second. Dynasty draft.
Yeah.
The NFL draft is a great time to start thinking about dynasty draft. If you were drafting number one on a dynasty draft right now, who do you take? I think I know exactly who should go. I'm
Okay.
curious Simon's take. I want your take.
Rookie only, or is this in general? Like, hey,
I
starting from
would say
scratch.
I think it's both. Like start
Okay.
from scratch and then rookie only.
Okay, so if I'm starting from scratch, it's Jamar Chase. I'm going to lean wide receiver just in general. There's just a much longer shelf life. And while Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase is a healthy debate, he's 1 year younger, more quarterback certainty there, right? Not that, Sam Darnold showed last year that they know what they're doing in terms of quarterback evaluation and development. So JJ could be great, but Joe Burrow is an NFL MVP or candidate to be an NFL MVP. So that duo should go nowhere for a long time. Rookie dynasty, it's Ashton Genty and it's not close, especially because maybe I'll be surprised, but it just feels like he's going to end up in a spot where, like, if he goes to Vegas, I might adjust my sentiment a little bit. And like Omari and Hampton went to Denver. They had the number one run block win rate offensive line last year, and they need a guy. I might flip that, but without knowing where they're going to land, it's Ashton Genty, who I think is truly in a class of his own in this historic running back class. Like, this guy is not good. He's not great. He is super elite.
That's interesting.
Oh,
Simon, do you have thoughts on that? You're a draft guy. You're a dynasty draft guy.
Yeah, it's again, I mean, Fields doing it the nicest way to you, Chad, where it's like you need so much info nowadays on your league and the settings that it's really hard to say what you should do in your rookie draft. Like in my league, last year I had the fifth pick in this nice league I've had with my buddies for 15 years. And I luckily worked my magic, got Jaden Daniels because I just kept talking about everyone else. I go, you're
yeah.
really going to pass on Harrison, all-time receiver, Neighbors, all-time wide receiver. And Jaden Daniels fell to me, and it's in a 2 QB league. And now I might have a top 5 guy for the next 10, 15 years. So my view of it is I probably would go what he talked about. And if we're doing overall, right, Chase, Jefferson, always go receiver. Receiver is by far the safest spot, right? In the Dynasty League, you want someone that's going to play for a long time, and their injury risk is mitigated. And, on the flip side, looking at this draft and just this upcoming season, I would just love, this is a personal question that's not going to help anyone else. Brian Thompson Jr., where do you put him on this level of wide receivers? Because I got him as a steal in my Dynasty League. I love him. I feel like it doesn't matter who his quarterback is going to be. This kid's talent is just out of this world. We saw it last year. Mac Jones came in.
Yeah.
Still, this guy was putting up insane numbers. What's your view on him? Is he already a top 5 receiver in fantasy football, or is he more top 10, back end top 10?
I mean, I think he's got a chance to be in that top 5. And I actually think my favorite calls in fantasy are not, and I mean, I would have loved to have been all over Puka Nacua last year going into his rookie season and been like, I think the guy's got top 10 upside, and then have him be whatever it was, wide receiver 4 or something. But I actually think the calls that are, to me, more satisfying are the ones where there's a guy who's really good already. We know that, right? But when you build your list from scratch, he doesn't quite crack the S tier, right? He's the really awesome player, but not quite in that same cut, because those are the more likely jumps, right? Like, that's much more likely than some 5th-round wide receiver becoming a top 5 play again this season. So I admit that this time of the year I focus much more on my draft rankings than my fantasy rankings, but I would imagine off the cuff that the first 4 receivers in some order are going to be Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then I would say that 5th is open between Puka. Probably Puka would be 5. Then it would be some sort of combination of Brian Thomas Jr. I probably AJ Brown will be in that conversation. I mean, that's the kind of tier that we're talking about. Like, it's AJ Brown, Brian Thomas Jr. I'm sure I'm forgetting Malik Neighbors, of course, like a few others in that same category. But BTJ is awesome, and he really did show that quarterback agnostic value. That I'm not saying it's the fault of receivers when they can't overcome poor quarterback play, but man, is it a comforting feeling when you see them ball with substandard at best quarterback play for much of the year.
Football is the fucking best.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh my God, I just
It's the
love it.
best.
Like thinking about Brian Thomas and the plays he was making last year,
Oh my God.
he was a miracle.
Yeah, he really was.
In
And I
fact,
mean,
he did
the only
that.
good thing about that offense once Trevor Lawrence went down was Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, they were a mess across the board, basically. And, that's a team that has some optimism right now. They got to nail this draft. But the only thing I can count on for Jacksonville going forward is Brian Thomas Jr. is the man.
And give some love to our guy, Chris Raybon, who
let's go.
Loved him last year and gave out another guy I want to talk about, Bucky Irving. Are we in a new age here, Field, of running back where I was someone who's made a lot of money doing season-long best ball leagues where I would take a running back around 1 or 2 and then not take another running back until round 12 or 13, right?
I kind of
you
like
basically fade running backs, take the backups. Guys always get hurt. Last year, no one got hurt.
No one got hurt.
All the studs played out, and their value shifted tremendously where are we in a year now where we're going to have 5, 6 guys, running backs in the first round once again, like it's 2008? Like, what's about to happen, Field?
We are. And by the way, before people get mad, yes, we know Christian McCaffrey missed all of last year, basically, right? So other than him, though, I mean, you think about the top dogs, Saquon, and Derrick Henry, and Jahmyr Gibbs, and James Conner, and on and on and on. The guys who were like in the top 10 by the end of the season, they played all year. I'm missing others, of course, but you get the point. I think so. I really do think so. Like, I think that people are going to say, you just have to have them because they're in this. We talked about recency bias earlier and the idea of the combine and how it influences draft stock. But yes, I believe we're going to see a very running back heavy start next year, especially because one factor we probably don't have in play next year is like Travis Kelce being like a top 5 pick, right? It's going to be Brock Bowers, but a little bit lower than that. And you might make the case that like there is, after Brock, there are more quality options. Kittle was right there as well on a points per game basis, but there just have been more. We'll see probably more quarterback fades this year too. Like Lamar was great last year. Josh Allen was great last year. Jaden Daniels was great. Jalen Hurts was great. But you may say to yourself, like, we don't have the one supernova at quarterback that you have to draft him early. And that's the edge you gain. I think the edge you're going to gain in people's minds going into the season is you either have running back depth or you don't. And next thing you know, it's week 2 of the playoffs and you're starting the Cardinals' 3rd string running back, even though James Conner, is still healthy. Like that's where I think things are going to land this year.
This is the greatest football conversation I've had in a month.
Since yesterday? Oh.
Since yesterday.
Since with your son. Yeah.
Since I was talking to my son at dinner last night.
Yeah.
This is great. Field.
I'll see you at a West Hartford pizza establishment later on to do it again.
Absolutely. As a reminder, the Favorites podcast is presented by Bet365. And now, new Bet365 customers get $150 in bonus bets when you bet $5. Sign up using promo code Favorites, deposit $10, place a bet for $5 to get $150 in bonus bets. Those bonus bets can be used on spreads, totals, player props, futures, and more. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older. Present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS in Iowa. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. Simon and I will return with our next episode of The Favorites on the Action Network YouTube page to discuss gambling's wild history with David Schwartz, Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Download us from Spotify, Apple Pods, wherever you get your pods. Rate, review, subscribe, leave us 5 stars, say whatever you want. Feedback is the gift. Until next time, love you.